We'll go under review.
What's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Under Review. My name is Joe DeRosa, and you can find me on Twitter/X at show_DeRosa. And with the draft behind us, there are some lingering questions about the Buffalo Bills roster that need to be asked when it comes to really what's going on with the defensive line room, what's going on with the secondary, what's going on with the wide receiver room. Some things that have popped up over the past week and a half that I felt like would be fun to address on the show tonight as we get further into offseason and as we are ahead of rookie minicamp, which will be this weekend. I appreciate each and every one of you joining us for this discussion. And when I say us, when I say we, I never mean just me. I got a guest every week, and tonight is my buddy from Bills Chat, Mr. Luca M himself. Luca, thank you so much for coming back onto the show. We were both just exchanging about the strife of our recent moves and hence new backgrounds, which is always a plus. How you doing tonight, man? How's everything been?
I'm doing great. No, when you reached out, I'm always happy to join. And yeah, it's right in that time now where I feel like we got our offseason Super Bowl done. So now it's just transition time, see where everything's going to go from here as we finally can break down rosters a little bit more.
Yes, sir. And it's a good time because I love the kind of the assurance you have now of how you're constructing rooms when you do like your mock rosters or when you're putting things together. I put together right after draft time every season kind of a list of who we got, what I think the order is going to be for them as far as depth chart. And then also the players that either got like futures signed or players that might be training camp bodies. I put them all together, and it's fun to just get those names down with certainty and not, hey, maybe they'll draft this guy. Maybe they'll draft this guy. And with that kind of being compiled, that information coming together, it just leads you to kind of wonder about certain facets with this team. And really some of the stories that have come out over the past couple months, you know, when you talk about, well, how does this wide receiver room shake out post-draft? Or how does the D-line function when you have two suspensions, two very key pieces that you anticipate getting a very large amount of the snap share? I mean, what do you think about the secondary? Are there bodies that you think are going to go? It's a lot to ask, you know, this early as we're just post-draft. But even though it is early, these are questions that are probably going to swirl around all the way till training camp. And I figured ask them now and let's see what happens. So Luca, before we get into the weeds of this discussion, I just want to turn it back to you. I mean, you know, you and Josh doing your thing over on Bill's Chat. What were your thoughts on the draft, and what are your thoughts on this roster right now as far as strengths, weaknesses, and maybe questions you have right now?
I think we came, and I say we because I think Josh and I are aligned in a lot of this, and we seem to have a singular mind with all of this. So if I squeak a we out, that's just understand that's where that's coming from.
You are one. I have mine.
Yeah. But realistically, we came away from it just feeling a little bit perplexed in the moment on the strategy of the entire draft overall. But when you peel back the emotions, you kind of let the dust settle and really just kind of evaluate what they had done, what kind of value they got in whatever positions they got it from. Overall, it was satisfied, I guess is the way to put it. It was okay. There's those personal desires of certain things. I would say I myself was a little bit more looking for a potential future down the line blue chip kind of in the works receiving weapon. But overall, I'm not going to sit here and gripe over it. I think the players that they did bring in instead are still valuable, especially your day one, day two guys. Day one, no problem whatsoever with Hairston, and we'll obviously get into that a little bit later. But overall, I was okay with it. It was definitely in the moment, though, I will say, a very interesting time during the draft as you just saw defensive player after defensive player come off, and you were just staring at certain things where in the future you're having questions on where the offensive side of the ball is going. But overall, I'm not going to gripe about it right now. The nice part is there will be a draft next year and the year after that. And it's, you just kind of reload and reset and go from there. So no serious qualms or issues with the draft, especially now that you can kind of take the emotions out of it.
Yeah, taking the emotions out of it is always the best part of draft discourse because, as several members of our network, you guys have probably faced, and really anyone in the Bills content community have faced, draft time brings a lot of emotion. It brings a lot of responses that are nice sometimes and sometimes not very nice. And it can be fun and it could also suck, but that's the nature of the game. And now that we are removed from it, it feels good to again just have certainty of over who they have and kind of change our perspectives over, well, this is what I wanted, but now this is where we're at. And a lot of this is kind of like I agree with you. Like there were certain reactions I had that I was like, like I'm a little iffy on this. Like I can remember the TJ Sanders pick only because I had a different idea in mind for what I wanted at defensive tackle. And then they kind of went in a direction that they've gone before. And I was like, but also it does make sense. It can be good. And like I've come around to a lot of like the iffiness I've had where I'm a little more positive on it with questions remaining. But ultimately, looking at the roster itself, it doesn't feel like there's a truly overwhelmingly glaring weakness. I know people have conversations about the wide receiver core. Even then, I still think it's a room that is solid at its base and can be functional. And then I just look around and say, I think just from an approach standpoint for Brandon Beane, the roster has been built up in a way that you would hope it would be post draft, where I feel like there isn't really truly like anything glaring. I look at any room and I say, oh my God, this is horrible. But I do have questions about the ceilings of these rooms and if the bets are going to pay off on a lot of them. And you had brought up wide receiver, and I know that we had Vito in our chat that was bringing up Caden Prather, and I'll pull up his comment again, but we'll pivot over to wide receiver to start. I know I have it a little out of order in the note sheet, but it's natural flow of conversation. Even though I told you it was going in a different way, that's totally on me. But I just wanted to pull this comment up because Vito, and I do recall Vito mentioning this in the last show and in our comments, Prather has a good shot at beating out Coleman. Your thoughts? He has to make good on every opportunity. Coleman is the golden boy right now. I was not impressed at all with his performance last year. I will say this to start, and I'll pass it to you, Luca. I don't think Prather's beating out Coleman. I think, however, he probably has a chance to earn a final wide receiver spot if they don't feel like Elijah Moore has it secured, or if they want to carry more than 5 this year. What do you think really about the player and then just where he might fit into this wide receiver room if you think it's realistic that he does?
The roster number breakdown is as by position group is a great point by you. Are they truly going to just stick with 5, which they seem to do, or maybe will they find value in bringing in that 6 with it, which of course changes the dynamics of everything. Elijah Moore to me does feel kind of like that true hard cutoff of where this group is at, but that we don't know what we have in Prather yet. Prather's a true unknown. You can like a prospect all you want coming out of a draft, coming into an organization, until they get through the offseason, until they get through training camp and they get into, those preseason games, you don't know what you have. And maybe he does surprise, maybe he does do things. And maybe realistically, he was a 7th round pick for a reason. And it's just, that's going to be a guy who doesn't end up making the roster, may come back to the practice squad. Who knows where that goes? But looking at the receiver group as a core, I don't know if the conversation, I definitely don't think the conversation is Prather over Coleman kind of deal. It really comes down to, is he going to be rosterable over an Elijah Moore or just as a 6th man? Because you see, even after him, the individuals on that depth currently, there's no one there that truly strikes you as week 1 roster guy. This guy needs to go. Prather is kind of that line. And then you're going into your KJ Hamlers, your Jalen Virgils, and so on and so forth, that realistically they didn't make the roster even previously for a reason. Why would all of a sudden that change? So it will be interesting to see how they do that. I don't know if they would ever go into 6 receivers just because they've never shown a track record to do it. And I've learned, kind of like back in the day with Brady with the Patriots, you never bet against Brady with the Patriots. You don't bet against trends that the Bills do with the roster and kind of decision making. And we'll get into that even with how they're going to handle rookie rotations, because there's such a long track record of success in the way they've done things, that why would they all of a sudden decide to flip it on its head, change it for what it is, especially considering, we're talking about a rookie receiver here in the 7th round. They did just take premium or more premium defensive linemen, where they have a very crowded defensive lineman room that they may want to have that extra spot for instead. So it will be intriguing overall, but Elijah Moore, to get back to and finalize that point, Elijah Moore seems to be that cutoff line of the fifth receiver as it stands now on May 6th. So a lot of time for that to change, but we'll see.
Yeah, definitely plenty of time for any of these takes and anything we say in tonight's show to change. But I do love that point. And, I love that you bring up the premium picks for defensive line and how that could affect other roster decisions. Because you talk about how the Bills constructed it last year, and there were 5 wide receivers in the room. You had your Mac Hollins. Eventually, you get Amari Cooper, but originally it was MBS, Shakir, Curtis Samuel, and Keon Coleman. Did I say Keon Coleman twice, or am I correct in that? Because I have the memory of a goldfish. Okay, either way, that would. I probably flubbed that. I don't know. The point being that the team, you have to look first at how this offense is constructed. Again, their scheme and how they want to operate. And how they want to operate is they want to dominate the line of scrimmage. They want to run the ball with a myriad of different run concepts, and receivers, while important and while they're going to help out the offense, of course, I wouldn't call it the primary focus, right? When you think about the Bills of a few years ago with Ken Dorsey and Brian Daboll, they maximized Josh Allen downfield and they tried to really spread the ball out to different targets, but also went vertical a lot. But it changes in league direction as far as defense and teams just being stout and playing a lot of too high and a lot of different coverages to be able to take explosives away downfield. The natural pivot for the Bills had always been, let's get better in the trenches. Let's run the ball more efficiently. And let's get a group of pesky receivers to really fortify, long sustainable drives. Like, let's make it that we have hands on deck that we can turn to, get the ball to quickly, and we're able to function. So when I think about that philosophy, and then I think about what you said, Luca, about the defensive line room, it being crowded and roster spots being at a premium, and you have to kind of cut in other places, I can stomach another year of 5 wide receivers where each one has a very functional role, but we're not kind of selling out to get a specific type of skill set in when we feel it's more important to have a different skill set in the defensive side of the ball, which it seems like, given the way this draft shook out, that's the Bills' exact plan and how aggressive they were in free agency at attacking defense and all of these different positions. So as far as the player himself, it's nothing against him. First off, I don't think he's replacing Coleman. I said that earlier. I think Coleman's a lock, and I would get used to the idea of him being a lock at least for another season. And if there's any progress, then 2 seasons. But I think that with Prather himself, I could see the 5th wide receiver spot, again, not being a guarantee for Elijah Moore, because you got to remember, too, Elijah Moore's contract, I believe it's up to 5 or up to 7. I'm actually blanking. I should have had it in front of me. But it's a cheap deal with a lot of incentives. And for that reason, that's not a guaranteed contract. Like, that's not something I see them saying, it's impossible for us to move on from this. Like, we can't cut ties with the player. I see it as, we believe in the player enough to offer him these incentives because we think maybe it's a way for us to save money. He'll bet on himself because his market wasn't crazy, given the fact that he just signed with the team. But it doesn't eliminate us from giving the spot if we see that our 7th round pick actually is panning out pretty well and kind of providing some of the same skill and providing some speed and quickness and burst and ability to separate, which I know Prather is able to do. I'm not ruling him out. I think the likeliest outcome, though, considering the fact that they took him in the 7th round and then went and got more, is that they want the veteran. They're not eliminating the idea that the veteran can't make the roster, but probably leaning that way. And, we'll just have to see the rookie kind of climb the uphill, along with the players you mentioned, Shavers, and talking about like KJ Hamler and Jalen Virgil, other options that I just don't think are going to make the active roster. But as Ralph Wilson Sr. actually comes in with this, can always count on Samuel to miss a chunk of games. You do have to wonder if he stays on the field at this point, because he does have an injury history. And if they do feel that maybe a player like Prather is someone that they can supplement into that role to be a speedster and still provide some juice for the room. So I think it's a valid question to wonder what his role would be if he makes the roster. I just don't think it's a 1-for-1 Coleman replacement. I think they have high hopes for Keon Coleman. I think Keon Coleman, you could argue the rookie season was underwhelming, but I don't think it's from just play alone. In fact, I would argue his play was ramping up prior to an unfortunate injury. And he himself said that the offense kind of moved on without him, not because he sucks, but rather, hey, we're rolling right now. Like, why are we going to change our formula just to fit me in the picture? And he was cool for that. I mean, he wants to get his targets, but he seemed pretty understanding of it. So yeah, I think to answer the question and to put a bow on this, and then just to continue on, I don't think Prather's replacing him. I think there's a chance he could get the 5, but I think it is going to be 5. And I think Moore has the leg up right now over guys like, Chenault too, who we briefly mentioned. Luca, any other thoughts on that topic?
No, it feels like for this season at least, the picture's clear. I think the thought now though is if you're looking future wise, there's definitely a lot more questions. Elijah Moore with the 1 year, Curtis Samuel will, unless we see something crazy this season, will probably be gone after this season. I believe his cap number basically goes down to nothing. And then from there, you're left with just 3 guys and 2 slots completely available going into next season. So this year feels like, as you said, the formula is kind of sound where it is. We'll see what happens for future years after the season, but I don't expect anything crazy this year.
Yeah, and just to put one final point out there too, because the conversation again is hyper focused on receiving room, and receivers matter. I'm not saying I hate them. I always have to be careful with these types of topics, Luca, because I never want it to get misconstrued that I'm like, oh, they don't need wide receivers. They suck. We don't need them. No, it's more just like the Bills want to have all hands on deck. You brought up the Brady Patriots. And again, it's not a 1-for-1 comparison. There are obviously differences in how they approached it, but everybody was a receiver in that offense, right? You had receiving backs that were capable of making plays out of the backfield and for quick hitters. You had your wide receiver room. You had obviously one of the greatest, if not the greatest tight end of all time, but tight ends in general that weren't named Rob Gronkowski that were contributors. And that Bills offensive philosophy that kind of mimics that in a way isn't going to change with Joe Brady at the helm. The tight ends are going to get involved. Running backs are going to get involved. And there's only so many targets to go around. So again, when talking about just the value of the wide receiver room, when you talk about the final few roster spots and what you prioritize, that wide receiver has to have special teams ability like that is crazy, kind of like Matt Collins did. Or they're just going to be kind of a throwaway if you're talking about like, well, this D lineman can play special teams quite well. Or this guy, this cornerback can return punts like Brandon Codry did. So yeah, I think it's the wide receiver conversation. Again, it went a lot of different places over the past week and a half, but talking about it functionally from roster building standpoint, I feel pretty comfortable with the prediction that it would be 5. So I don't really have anything else on offense because every other room feels pretty solidified. Like James Cook, Ray Davis, Ty Johnson are all back. Obviously, and Darrington Evans got re-signed and people buy into him getting a roster spot. That is great. Maybe. I don't think so, but maybe. And I'm not even hating on the player. I just think the room's crowded. Quarterback, if we want to spend an hour talking about the backup quarterback battle extraordinaire in Trubisky and Mike White, maybe. I don't think we need to do that. And then offensive line, I mean, there isn't much to it when it comes to uncertainty. Like your starting 5 is there. It's just a matter of like depth and maybe if they feel some of their free agents or futures are able to kind of elevate to a larger role. Like do they feel Kendrick Green could give them legitimate juice this year? Does he even make the roster? That's kind of a thing I wonder too. Like, Luca, do you see anything with the offense right now and say like you still have any questions or outside of wide receiver? Like, is it pretty solidified?
No, I think offense, you saw with the draft philosophy, they feel good about the future. That's why they didn't really dip their toes in it too much. They really didn't do much in there other than maybe even bring in a couple linemen where realistically you're just bringing them in to see if you can develop and find gold elsewhere. It's the only thing that'll be fascinating to me. Is Kendrick Green even going to make this roster? Outside of that, though, the offense is set, and that's not necessarily a bad thing because we obviously saw what the offense was last year, and it was great. It was phenomenal. Mm-hmm. It had 8 straight games of 30+ points. Like there was just so many great things about it that they're not messing with the formula. They're just going with it as is. And people like to see new things. I am a prisoner of the moment in that as well. You want a shiny new toy to make it even better. But, at the end of the day, it feels like it's in a great spot regardless. And it always helps when you have 17 under center to do that.
Absolutely. I mean, 17 is going to make an OL intrinsically better because he himself can evade even the toughest of edge rushers. And it's truly a beautiful thing to witness. But I like keeping him clean, keeping him comfortable. And I'm always a fan of anyone who is able to fortify the pocket. And I am, TP brings up a point too that should be discussed more, in my opinion. This interior offensive line is in jeopardy over the next couple of seasons. You got your tackles locked down, but you got McGovern on an expiring deal, or at least on the final year of his deal, and you're hoping they can work an extension out. I'm praying they do. I know on the film room, he mentioned that they're still kind of not there yet, and they're hoping they can get something done. And then you're talking about Osiris Torrance, who is about to enter year 3. So next year is going to be final year of his rookie. And then you talk about Edwards, who has a chance to likely be gone after this year. And it could be some shakeup in the room if you don't have any extensions to give out. And what I do wonder is if any of the depth, because they've accrued insane amounts of OL depth over the past couple seasons, right? Late round of draft picks, just random guards signings that they've had in the past. I mean, La'el Collins was like a throwaway signing last year. That's how you know the room is deep, because even though Collins was longer in the tooth, like that's still a name that could function in your offensive line if it was bad, and he didn't even make it. So it's just like it's nice to see that. But talking about like Alec Anderson, and then of course we mentioned Kendrick Green, who's only here on a 1-year deal. Like I do wonder if there is any opportunity, if any, because OL health was a remarkable thing last year. It is likely that there could be an injury. Like, is it possible that maybe one of these guys gets almost something of like a de facto audition to fortify their spot and you feel more comfortable moving on from someone like an Edwards? Like, that's what I'm going to be watching for. And that's a question I have about the roster. What does it look like behind them? But if it's not this year's problem, it is also something I could see them going heavy on next year in the draft, where maybe interior offensive line becomes more of a priority. And you're like, all right, they were worried about it too. They're taking care of it. But also in Cromer, we trust, guys. Remember, in Cromer, we trust. Pulling up this comment from John Robert one more time. They may only carry 2 tight ends on the 53. John, I appreciate you watching and I love your comments, but this actually offends me because as a new Jackson Hawes truther, I'm going to have to ask you to include him in all of your roster builds. There will be 3 tight ends on the roster. Well, technically 4, Reggie Gilliam, but excluding Reggie Gilliam, fullback, tight end, whatever. It's going to be Dawson Knox, Dalton Kincaid, and Jackson MF Hawes. That dude is going to hurt people, and you best be ready to watch this man destroy human beings on the field. God, I hope he does, because if he doesn't, this is going to look really bad. But hey, it's early, so I have the right to be wrong.
I will say, hey, to get on the bandwagon of Jackson Hawes, I will just real quick. When you watch everything about him, because I will be honest, he wasn't on my radar until we picked him, and he watched everything with his game. All I could see, and I said it on our podcast, our show, I was like, I see those Kincaid, Shakir flare outs, and then him just leading all the blocks, leading that lane up that sideline. And it was just beautiful to watch. He was doing it so well in college. I almost imagine that's exactly what the Bills front office are. They're like, we see all of this. Yeah, we need to turn those 3-yard catches to Kincaid into 8, 9-yard catches, and this guy can do it for us. And if that works, I'm all for it. That's a great way to spend your 5th round pick.
Oh, absolutely, dude. Even if he doesn't catch a single pass, I just want to watch him hit people. Like, I love players that I don't have to, like, I can put irrational amounts of stock in, not because I expect them to get 1,000 yards, but they're just going to be so fun. Like, this is a new Lee Smith. I know I saw Lee Smith mentioned in the comments from someone, like, this is what it feels like, just a hammer in your offense. And it's like, just hell yeah, man. Like, I love football where dudes beat each other up. I want that aesthetic. I want the nasty, and we got it. And speaking of tight ends, Brandon, thank you for watching. I'm pulling this comment up because I did see this a little earlier, actually, on my way home. And I see the fan base has been in a bit of a tizzy. See, I was busy today, so I didn't get a chance to scroll. And now I'm kind of glad I didn't, because I have seen this conversation and it's making me really angry. And it's not your fault, Brendan. I appreciate you watching. Just getting in. What are we thinking about the image of Kincaid earlier? Looks extremely slim, and due to his knee injuries, not at all in shape. The staff has said they want him in. Danger. I think it's too early to worry, personally. I think, yes, I want Kincaid. I've been someone who's been like cool with the idea of Kincaid putting on size. I have my concerns about him. I don't hate the guy. I believed in the player when we drafted him. I do think, however, like, I wouldn't be mad if there was more put on his frame, considering some of my concerns with his blocking that I want to get better in year 3. But I don't think those concerns are exacerbated by a photo or photos of him at a very early ramp up in the offseason. Like, I think it's just recovery mixed with some atrophy that can kind of improve over the next few months as he continues to train, as he continues to stay healthy. Like, I think we're making too big of a deal of some still frames. And if he looks really lean come training camp, I'll be more worried. But right now, I just think it's a bit overblown. But Luca, what do you think about this before we move on to defense?
Week 1 is 4 months away. There's plenty of time to build up. And yeah, I wouldn't read too much into an individual's stature in early May, just off a couple pictures. Yes, it would be nice for him to be a little bit more built up and take off season more seriously. There's a lot of players I think can fit under that umbrella of a statement. And realistically, this is the offseason still for them. This is not
Mm-hmm.
the time to really get going, get into game shape and everything as such. That time will come and we will see how it is there. And on top of it all, Dalton Kincaid is also, in my opinion, just not an individual I need to be absolutely freakishly huge. He's really just a
Yeah.
big receiver for us. So I'm not asking him to be built like a Gronk. It's no, your job is going to be as a primary pass catcher. So overall,
Mm-hmm.
it's right now not concerned too much with anything going on for any player. It's not even just Kincaid. Any
Right.
player's physical condition right now,
Anybody.
not concerned.
Yeah. It's so early. And Roy says, I don't believe they drafted Kincaid because of his blocking, did they? That was the secondary part of his profile. He was a willing blocker. He wasn't consistent at Utah, and it's kind of been more of the same. He's willing to get his hands dirty, but he just gets kind of messed up sometimes. Just some ugly reps sometimes where he's just out physicaled by somebody, gets blown off. It's not all the time. There are times where he does win, and I've seen it, but there are a lot of times where he doesn't. And I'm not asking him to put on, again, like astronomical amounts of weight. I don't even know if it's necessary. Maybe it's a technique issue. Maybe it's just, again, like getting in the right spots. But I do feel like you should want his blocking to improve if you hope to see him on the field, not just as a wideout, because again, and this is a great point, and I follow, and if you guys haven't followed Max Toscano on Twitter, he is probably the leader of the tight end army. I'll shout him out. I'll make sure he sees this segment, but kind of eye-opening analysis on a lot of tight ends. And the big thing is, like, if you're going to have a tight end that can't block, you basically have a receiver. So now that guy has to be a good enough receiver where he can take the mantle from a different player on your roster. So ask yourself, if Kincaid just can't get the blocking down at all, and he's just bad at it, and it doesn't improve at all, do you feel he is a better receiver right now than, let's say, the top three? So we could talk about Khalil Shakir. You could talk about Josh Palmer. You could talk about Keon Coleman. And I could make an argument that yes, but I would feel a lot better about his usage, about the flexibility of the offense, and about how you can align, how you can change personnel, how you can look different if he can block, because it sells a lot more. It doesn't limit him to one-dimensional wideout tight end. Now we can put him in line, and now we can leak him out. Now we can do things in condensed sets with him on the field and feel comfortable running because he can hold a block. All these different things to create more of a threat from the player individually, which is why I would like his blocking to improve, which is why I would like to see maybe a frame adjustment or maybe just, again, better technique. But I don't think now is the time to worry about that because it's May. And we have plenty of time, like you said, till the first game. And somehow I end up talking about Strawberry Uncrustables every show now. But let's just give him some Strawberry Uncrustables and we'll get him up, man. Like we'll get some weight on. I'm telling you, dude, like 2 of those things is what is it? Like 1,000 calories. Just load him up with those things, man. We'll be good. Carb loading, baby. But thank you guys for the comments. And let's move on to defense, Luka. And let's start with the D line, which I think is the most polarizing when we talk about really what it's going to look like post-training camp. Because again, if we had Ogunjobi, if we had Hoyt for the 6 games without the suspensions, I think the Bills still would have gotten aggressive in the draft. But it makes the projection a little clearer because these guys are going to be there game one. Now you have to account for the absence of 2 players for a good chunk of your season. And you have to wonder, is there going to be any major pivots from that? Are you going to see a pretty standard status quo D-line room and just maybe a fringe player at the end that you can kind of part ways with, which unfortunately for the Bills has been kind of like Ilianku's calling for them. And I think Ilianku deserves a lot more shine in the league. And he's a very good run defending interior defensive lineman. What do you think about this? I mean, edge rushers, defensive tackle, we can group them together. How do you see the room shaking out? What are your questions about it? And how do you think they get answered?
I would like to believe at least that the suspensions didn't play a major role. Minor role, understandable, but draft is draft. You don't draft just because of immediate 6-game suspensions on your roster that you're staring down the barrel of. But now that they have what they have, thanks to that, TJ Sanders, Landon Jackson, Dayon Walker, so on and so forth, it will be fascinating to see what they do. I think the suspensions to Ogunjobi and Hoyt open up the realistic ability for Dayon Walker, for instance, to make the roster and kind of get that 6-game tryout and be a regular player in the rotation just because they need to have that body in play there. Is that absolutely going to happen? One, we don't know. We're in May. But 2, I don't actually know as well because let's say there's a world where Dayon Walker is making this roster. That then to me would be 5 defensive tackles, most likely making a game day roster. And that's a lot. That is a heavy interior defensive line focus on that. I don't see then what you're doing at edge to circumvent that or I mean, you're getting really thin at any other position group if you're doing it. So it will be interesting. I think Landon Jackson's going to be the most beneficiary of all of this. I think Landon Jackson's going to see a lot of play. I think Michael Hoyt and Landon Jackson in the immediate fill the exact same role. They are essentially guys that are going to be able to always keep their edge. They're not going to let easy runs bounce outside of them. They're going to be able to do their job opposite of Greg Rousseau, and they're going to do a great job of that. I think Bosa is, of course, your pass rush specialist that they're going to use opposite Greg Rousseau, but then your more primary run defending, lengthy defensive end edge play is probably now going to land more on the shoulders of Landon Jackson early on with that suspension. And that's who I think the biggest beneficiary of all of this is. But the game day actives, inactives are going to be a fascinating one because you see Dwayne Carter. Are they truly going to make him that one technique like we've heard an inkling of? Dalen Walker, is he going to maybe make the roster? Game day roster, I should say. I'm not sure about that because realistically, that's Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, TJ Sanders feel like locks. So from there, you might have one more game day active. And realistically, they like to reward their veterans over their rookies. So that's where Dwayne Carter comes into play as long as he's healthy. I will say this. I really do wonder if you see a De'Aaron Walker, if you see a TJ Sanders really explode, or Dwayne Carter really takes to the one technique, if you see that happen in that 6 games, would it be just we see Ogunjobi out, or he's just a game day inactive or whatever it is, and they just keep rolling with that? I could easily see that world happening and becoming reality as well. I don't think Ogunjobi really is a lock to be game day active come week 7. There could be a serious reality that as long as someone else shows something, they'd rather go with that individual because at least they've been there from week 1, shown what they can do, and they're more in game ready shape to just hit the ground running. So the game day actives, inactives for the defensive line group are going to be an absolute fascinating one. I mean, making the roster will be interesting, but then when it comes to actually who is active, inactive, that's a whole nother chess game right there that it's very, very difficult to decipher. And another individual like Javon Solomon is really getting the short end of the stick, it feels like, because it would be nice to see what he can do in the pass rush game and everything. But again, the numbers just don't back him up kind of getting game day active, calls. I don't see how it works in his favor in any sort of capacity, pre or post suspensions.
Yeah. It's so tricky because I look at this room or these rooms, if you separate DL and DT, or edge rusher DT, and I kind of sit here like, damn, I'm having a hard time deciding who I would actually cut because I can make a case that outside of your typical practice squad guys, and again, like maybe they develop in Zion, Branson, Dean, but like going strictly with guys that have played, been on the active roster, has seen game action, it's hard for me to look at this and say there's like a runaway option to either part ways with in the offseason or at least make it consistent and active. And that's why camp will be imperative as we get closer to it, because you're going to really see how they're shaking up the depth chart, how you're going to see these players kind of layer on top of each other, who is getting first team reps, who's getting second team reps. And looking at the edge group, it's hard for me to like justify moving on from Solomon after one season. Again, you brought him last year. It would really suck, but I like the juice he plays with. I think he's violent with his hands. I think there's plenty of explosion off the line. He's just a little shorter, but I also think he's got long enough arms where he can mitigate that problem. And I think he is a viable threat for a pass rush. And then it kind of leads me to wonder, because if you have Hoyt for the 6-game suspension, then your room is pretty much like stout, right? It'd be Rousseau, Bosa, Jackson, Epineza, Solomon. But like, do you think it's a possibility that maybe they decide, hey, we might be willing to move on from like Epineza because he's on the final year of his deal, and maybe they decide to make a trade or something like that where we want to make the easier decision, even though we have Hoyt kind of going on the 6-game suspension. Maybe we do actually move on from him, find a supplemental option from the practice squad to hold us over at the back end of the depth chart, and then just when Hoyt comes back, they go back and we're good. I don't know, but that's something I've been asking myself looking at this is really just, hey, are they going to move on from somebody? Like you talk about game day inactives, but is there a possibility that it's not even going to stretch? Well, they have to do it at some point, but it's possible that they just part ways with a player. And then you look at some of the guys in the DT room to carry it over to there. And it's like, if Ogunjobi, like you said, if they play out of their minds and there's no real need for the 1-year deal. Do the Bills eat it and move on? It's a lot of money to stomach in the middle of the year. I don't know if they do. But then you look at, unfortunately, I know these been the hot button topic when it comes to this specific conversation, which I hate, but Dwayne Carter, if there's no development at one tech and he's really struggling, like, is it possible they decide it's not worth it to continue the project and move on from him and cut ties on a cheaper deal? Do they feel like maybe Daquan Jones is longer in the tooth and they end up moving him because they could save some money post June 1st on Daquan Jones and they want to go with an inexperienced room? There's a caveat to every decision. And it's a question I ask because I have no freaking idea what they're going to do. It is not obvious at all. They could surprise us. They could not surprise us. And I know that's such a vague thing to say, but truly this year, I look at the defensive lineman, like last year, it was really easy for me to plot out how it was going to go, right? Like they felt like later on in free agency, they get their patchwork one tech, and then they get Dwayne Carter, and you have Daquan Jones at Oliver, and then I think they had Robinson as their other DT, and it was kind of like, yeah, whatever, like easy, like that's probably back end, probably gets cut. It was so easy last year. This year, I'm having a really hard time because, again, suspensions throw a wrinkle. These guys are going to come back. At the very least, Hoyt, I see them as a long-term option to be a tactical D lineman and not even just be an edge rusher, but interior defensive lineman, off-ball linebacker at times, which he has played numerous snaps at. And then you just wonder, like, how do they do it? So I don't want to give a prediction because it's going to be so horribly wrong. What I will say is I'm excited for the shakeup, and I do think there's a lot of pressure on guys like Carter, on even guys like Deion Walker, who are like project players at this point that have to prove their worth. I think with Walker, though, a little more grace because he just got picked. And also, I think they're so believing in his upside that he's not going anywhere. But like back end of the D tackle room is going to be really interesting. And then for Ogunjobi, what's the dilemma with him coming back? Like, is he going to play well enough to justify playing above a rookie? And if not, then like, what do you do with him? Is he inactive? Like, so many questions about this D-line room that I'm going to be paying really close attention to as we get closer to training camp. But I have no answers except probably like the top of the room. Like, I know Joey Bosa is going to play. I know Greg Rousseau is going to play. Like Landon Jackson, you know, if they do move on from Epineza, do they feel like Landon Jackson, even though it's not the same player, you know, Jackson is more of an athletic profile, you know, does he fill that kind of long range edge setting run defender to start with some pass rush juice to boot? And then does this justify Solomon being like a rotational pass rush specialist if they're on third and long? Like, I could go for hours about this because this is the most perplexing room I think they have to sort through. And I have no idea. Luca, I'll turn it back to you. Any other thoughts on this?
No, the thought process you're going through with this is exactly what you run into when you use your second, your third, and your fourth round picks, all for defensive line. And on top of it, of course, there's the suspensions that throw the absolute monkey wrench in all of it. But I love the point on Daquan Jones you bring up because it's something that I believe myself, I brought it up on a show. Josh has brought it up before. Daquan Jones showed a little bit of a regression already last season. And you really start to wonder, you know, what we're going to be doing at that 1T spot. And you can move on from him. So if you see something else in there and you need to make the number because the math is not mathing right now. It just isn't. And there's just too great of numbers right now for you to be able to roster and also get your game day lineup figured out with how it stands. So someone has to be moved on, most likely. You know, are you going to just use those suspensions as an excuse to push it down to week 7, 8, depending on the bye situation? Are you going to do that and really just kind of see where it goes and just have this extended tryout? Yeah. I foresee what your idea was being a reality where most likely someone like an Epinesa or Daquan Jones is most likely moved on from before the season even starts, because you need to get that number in a more favorable spot that's going to not make it as difficult when week 7, 8 comes around and you now have these suspended players coming back that, as you mentioned, I mentioned Ogunjobi maybe being moved on from. I didn't necessarily mean that from the roster because you are paying him a substantial amount of money. It's just he will no longer be game day active because everything else is working. But you still have to get those numbers to work. And that is the most difficult part of all this. I'm with you on it. It's an interesting problem to have. I don't even know if I necessarily call it a great problem to have just because there's so much unknown with it all, being that there's a lot of rookies involved. You have Javon Solomon with everything you brought up in his plus side. There's still an unknown factor to that where you haven't seen it in a consistent, or just you haven't seen the actual snap count to make it justified. Right. And it's just, yes, Greg Rousseau, Ed Oliver, and Joey Bosa. Those are your locks. Everyone else, I think you are up for ability of being on the short end of the stick of making the numbers work and figuring out this roster construction.
At least from the degree of game day inactive to just outright cut. Because, like, you got your players you just took, but, like, if TJ Sanders has a bad camp, are they going to throw him out there to be, like, a 3-tech rotational or even a 1-tech? I don't know. So it does pose the interesting question. And thank you to Just the Tip of Canoe for the super chat. We appreciate you watching, as well as every one of you who are joining us tonight. Best case scenario is we get both guys back from suspension and we have one of those good problem to have situations. Good show, guys. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. And yeah, it is a good problem to have when you have so many bodies that it's how do you actually organize it, because everyone has a case to make the roster. But I pulled up that comment from AK Cash before because this is also unfortunately something that probably happens. There'll be enough injuries to work it out by week 7, but that's also what makes it frustrating. You can't bank on injury, but you want to, because it's like, well, Joey Bosa's in the room. He's gotten hurt every year and he's 30 years old, but we can't definitively say, oh, he's going to get hurt. But I guess if you do believe in the idea of padding for the potential that he does get injured, which by each year he gets older and by the injury history could be a likely possibility, then I'm fine with it. But it's a tricky thing. And then I saw someone mention before about linebacker, and we could segue to that a little bit. Because again, I don't really have much to question about the linebacker room, except, do you think they move on from Spector? Do you think, Ulofashio sticks around and then they only carry, Bernard, Milano, Williams, Andreessen, and Ulofashio? Like, do you think that justifies them to keep a defensive lineman because they feel the linebacker room is really rich and they don't need it? Like, what do you think about that?
I'm not the biggest Balin Spector guy. I'll start there. I think if they were to move on from him and finally just give that availability of that spot to someone else, I'm all for it. I would love to see kind of what an Ulofashio could do in that role. But realistically, they are set in that linebacker position for the most part. Of course, your starters are Milano and Bernard. From there, you have Dorian Williams, who seems to be a very secure weak side linebacker, depth rotational piece, kind of, even if you need to roll 3 linebackers deep in a game plan, he's absolutely foots the bill of exactly everything you need. And then from there, you can even consider, as we all know, Taron Johnson is just a small linebacker at your nickelback spot. So you're in a weird way, you're probably game day active 4 linebackers, if you're including Taron in this conversation. Obviously, he's not, but 3 to 4. And then Ulofashio taking that Spector role I am all welcoming to, just because I think Balin Spector, as serviceable at best as he was, serviceable at best is something I would like to not feel is good enough to make this roster, especially when you keep spending assets for the defensive side of the ball. If you're going to utilize one of those back end roster spots for special teamers, and then all of a sudden find yourself, because of linebacker injuries, needing to use them, they need to be a little bit better at the actual linebacker position than a Balin Spector. I'll just leave it there. It's a tough watch whenever he has to get meaningful snaps in that role. So I'm all game for an Ulofashio or any other individual to see what else they can do there, because I think Spector's time has kind of run its course.
The health for me had always been the thing. I think Spector as a run defending linebacker has had positives, but in coverage has just looked brutal at times. And he's a depth linebacker. Like, that's kind of the game you play with him. And he was put in some rough spots. It's hard to defend Derrick Henry in the Baltimore offense when you are essentially a 3rd string, 4th string linebacker. I was kind of like, yeah, this was going to happen at some point. They were playing out of their minds against Miami and holding down the fort against Jacksonville. But like, here we are, and you have the best running offense in football besides your own, and you're getting your ass kicked. And like, it sucks. I do think the player himself has some potential, and if it's not with Buffalo, it could be somewhere else. I do think the idea of moving on from him is something from a roster building standpoint feasible. And even if you want to make this argument, like they either only carry 4 or that people have suggested in our chat, and it's something could be possible, maybe they actually designate Hoyt full-time as a linebacker, and then they have him take the spot, which frees up the edge rush space to be able to keep AJ Epineza and have Javon Solomon. And then there's like a problem solved right there. I don't really know. I could see that happening because, again, Hoyt has experience playing linebacker. He's like a tactician. He's all over the place. So if they want to like do the loophole that you're a linebacker, but really like we're going to just have you play a brunt D line and then fill in linebacker in certain packages, that works too. And I'd be I'd be fine with it. And I think Spectre could find work on a different team. Like, I don't even say that to be like facetious or passive aggressive or like trying to give a polite FU. Like, I don't like, players are playing. Like, I don't want to root for anyone to get cut and be a jerk. But like, it does seem like when you look at the trend of how they've drafted linebacker and who they've signed, it is a possibility that he might get moved on from. And if he does get moved on from, like, I wish him all the best, or he stays. And as people have said, he'll be starting by week 6, which seems to always happen too. I just hope we're healthy. I hope everyone stays healthy. But yeah, apart from that, the linebacker room seems pretty stout. And for that reason, I didn't want to give too much time to it because I think, Uofashio maybe see some reps and Dreesen maybe see some reps, but it might be more special teams play. But the secondary could be fun. And there are, plenty of bodies in the room now after a draft where we were begging for corner. Brandon Bean said, you want corners? I got corners. Here's 2, technically 3 if you count Jordan Hancock. And you want safety? Here's Jordan Hancock again. It's a room that it's a room that needed the depth, and I think they got plenty of depth. They also got versatility in the room. Again, like, even though Harrison and Strong have primarily lined up as boundary, I could see a world where maybe you have them occasionally line up as a nickel or occasionally shift their platform. You talk about Hancock again, who is a versatile member of your secondary, and then you pose the question with the corner room to start. Benford's a lock. Hairston, we saw it with Elam, where your first round pick is not a guarantee to at least get a brunt of the starting snaps. And maybe a corner you took later in the draft might lap him. I am hoping that doesn't happen again. Although it is a good problem because the player that laps him ends up being really good and gets a contract extension. So, how do you see the cornerback room shaking out? What are the questions you have? Who gets cut? Like, do you see it kind of like as a predictable room, or are there anything you're kind of looking at like, I wonder?
The parallels to this room to how it was in 2022 is fascinating to me. That is my immediate takeaway from draft to now.
Both had Trey White.
But it is crazy. So you have your all pro level corner, your stud on one side, you just paid, of course, in this scenario being Benford. And then on the other, you have your first round pick, your athletic specimen being Maxwell Hairston. And then, by the way, you drafted this he doesn't pop on tape when it comes to his speed and athleticism, but he's very good at playing the ball. He's very sound defensively, and everything he does keeps things primarily in front of him, but has the ability to still attack things if it gets behind him. And Dorian Strong, you get him later on, and all of a sudden you're probably going to see, it's an early forecast, but it feels like something where only because this coaching staff has shown us they don't like to dive 2 feet in on one singular rookie. I do wonder what they're going to do with that opposite out boundary corner position overall. Could we see something like we saw week 1 against the Rams in that 2022 season, where all of a sudden you had Kyer Elam, but actually the one who started was Christian Benford because he won that at least starting rep in camp over your first round pick. I'm not saying that's going to happen again because I'm all in on Hairston, especially his play style opposite of Christian Benford. It's a beautiful marriage in my eyes. But can you see a reality where he's not necessarily getting 100% of the snaps or even 75%? Maybe he's getting a little bit under 75%, and they still want to see what they got in a Dorian Strong, or if they're just not fully sold on Hairston because he has a lot of rookie mistakes in him, they bring in your Dane Jackson. I'm really hoping not this, but they bring in your Dane Jackson just to be the safe option on the opposite side. Or, and again, love Trey White, the guy and everything. I think his best play is well behind him. You see someone like him just to get some more safe, and I keep using air quotes for a very good reason, safe reps opposite of Christian Benford. I cannot wait to watch this. And again, I always keep bringing up the parallels because I really would love to see, I want to see Hairston get 100% because he's just an absolute beast. That's the A and B plan. But C plan to me would be, okay, we actually seem to have found maybe potential another diamond in the rough in the late round with Dorian Strong. Hairston's going to get majority of the snaps, but we got this guy that, depending on what we're trying to achieve defensively, he can do something just like Benford opposite of Benford that will be intriguing. And because I keep bringing that up because even as you watch Dorian Strong, it is scary how similar his tape looks to a Christian Benford right now. The past couple years, it is scary how similar it is. And I personally love that because you can't have too many Christian Benfords. They're not athletic freaks, but boy, do they just shut down their side and do it sound and collectively. They are great, great boundary corners that feel like there's not too many Christian Benford level guys that just do their business quietly. That I would be fascinated by what Dorian Strong can bring if he's anything at all.
Yeah. I like the comparison to Benford because, again, you can never have too many stout corners in your room. And with the way the Buffalo Bills have developed defensive backs, mostly, obviously Elam was kind of a Elam was kind of a. Sorry, I just got this comment. Did you leave the conclave? And for background on this, Luca, when I did the draft live stream, my setup wasn't set up yet. It still isn't, honestly. So I did like a shitty green screen background, which it was like what's like a funeral home, and I ran with it for 6.5 hours. It was the best decision I ever made because I was just having so much fun with the chat. It got called a brothel, it got called the cigar lounge, it got called Hogwarts, Gryffindor, everything. So I just had to call that out because that was a fun time. But I like the comparison because I think, again, stout, technique heavy, not world beating athleticism, but just able to make a play with good processing is never anything you can have too much of. And it's a great way to round out your room. Wow, guys that are more, not even projects, but like athletic guys that maybe need to refine their game a little bit more can work into and rotate into. And I think that was the vision originally with Kaiir Elam was we feel comfortable with Bedford's floor enough where we don't need to rush him. Benford just molded into his own and ended up becoming a really good corner that got an extension and Elam never panned out. I hope, and I don't think it's going to be the same or like it's going to end up as this 1-for-1 situation with Hairston. I think Hairston is coming from a more similar system. I think Hairston is someone that, when at least just a zone corner to start, is going to do quite well. It's really the man coverage chops that I have more concerns about in the frame. But again, like he has, reach, he has length, he has ball skills, he has speed. So those traits are there to mold into man where at least he could be a good enough man corner. And I feel really comfortable with kind of saying I think he's going to get one of the top spots, if not the de facto CB2 across from Benford. But the back end of the room, like you brought up Dane Jackson, who the Bills know him. He has scheme familiarity. Fans were not happy. I was not mad at it because I viewed it as he is going to compete in camp for a spot. And if he doesn't get it, it means someone beat him for the spot, which is a good thing. And we need to stop losing sleep over Dane Jackson signing a 1-year contract with the Buffalo Bills. And if Dane Jackson wins it, but it's a crowded room, guess what? He played well enough to get the spot as the final boundary corner on your team that you hope barely sees the light of day or just plays special teams if they make him do that. With the top half of the room, I think it's likely that you're going to see it as status quo. Benford, Hairston, and then I think Trey White as your 3 and Strong as your 4. And the reason, Taron Johnson, I'm excluding this, talking purely boundary, because obviously Johnson's spot's solidified. But I think with Trey White, he played better last year. He's vet presence. Scheme familiarity is a big thing. If you feel like you want to go with the vet over the rook, I do get it. And I could see Trey White being their primary rotational guy with limited snaps, but still has all the juice to be a good coverage corner. And again, like he got demonized and people thought he was done when he was in the Rams defense. And obviously it wasn't going well. I think it was just a mismatch. But I think that Trey White got a lot better over the year. And I think he does have a future with this team that isn't just like camp body. I think he is going to play. And I think that for that reason, I feel comfortable with him being CB3 and eventually maybe going down the path to later on depth if Strong ends up being something more than just like another depth body, but actually has like the chops that Benford might have had when he was coming out and you feel comfortable. So corner room, I really just want to know what the back end looks like. And also Brandon Codrington, who I count as corner, but we haven't really mentioned much of, and his name circulates all the time because of the impending returner battle. This might be reductive. I could be wrong. I open myself to being wrong. I don't think he's losing his role. I don't think he's losing that specialist role. I just don't see why you would. He had an injury at the end of the year that derailed him in the playoffs and then didn't come back for the playoffs, but that was also because he wasn't 100% and maybe they had a new thing going and they didn't want to interrupt it because they needed to have it in place with Shakir. But before that, he was a very big threat as a returner. And I really liked him as a returner. And I felt safe and comfortable with him as a returner. And we traded for him, and he's a rookie. Was a rookie. I don't think I want to give that up. And I don't think I want to move on from Codrington. I think I want to keep him. And I think I want to keep him in that role. So I'm sorry to the like Chenault truthers or like the Elijah Moore returns or whatever. Like, I want Codrington to be that guy. Like, I don't really have an opinion otherwise. Like, I think that's my guy. What do you think?
Man, the Chenault Truthers thing just gave me shivers. I do not need to see
Shout out
that.
Kyle.
Oh boy. No, 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 no. Yeah, I'm okay with Codrington. This safe comment is perfect. Before he was getting scratched, due to injury and then just scratched going into playoffs, when he was your primary returner, you did feel safe. And he did have a couple pops there and you felt like you had something there. I will say it sucks that he takes up a defensive back spot overall on your roster construction to make it happen. It feels like, um, and I say that only because the brief moments you saw him even play any sort of defensive back, of course, we're in blowout games that don't matter at the end of, whatever it was, but he's getting mossed by your Alec Pierce in garbage time or whatever it is. And it's like, okay, this guy can't actually play corner at all, but it's okay because if he has to do that, it's probably a lost cause at that point, or you're already blowing out the team that the game's over and it doesn't matter anyways. So
Mhm.
that's where it's like, it does suck. It takes up one of those spots for you on your
Yeah.
roster, but overall, the comfort blanket that he is in the return game is enough for me to go and justify, yes, this is worth it. Everything's fine. I will say there will be one eye a little bit in camp and everything like that on Daquan Hardy. And if anything can transpire there, just because he's someone that fascinates me myself, honestly, it's the Terrence McGee fan in me that just wants to see someone like a Daquan Hardy work out. But that's the individual I look at a lot more than Laviska Shenault to maybe be someone that could threaten Codrington's role on this team, because at least Daquan Hardy, at least it seemed in very, very brief glimpses, has some sort of ability to play defensive back and corner and everything. So let's see what comes with that. If nothing comes with that, it is what it is, and you have Codrington. He is your safety blanket. But Daquan Hardy's kind of the guy I have my eye to on. If Codrington isn't the answer, what is?
Yeah, and I liked Hardy in preseason last year, and I wonder if there's a place for him in this room. It is, again, another very crowded room with a lot of justification for a lot of different players. If Hardy can take on the return role, but then be a backup nickel, that's awesome. But then you ask yourself, and I'll transition over to the safety room because that's just where I have him listed, even though he's an all-around DB. Yeah. But Jordan Hancock, what is the outcome for him? Do you actually think he is truly a depth safety? And then does he take Cam Lewis's spot? Safety, I think, with Taylor Rapp and Cole Bishop, that seems to be the pairing. I think that's what they're going to go with. The question I have is behind them immediately. And do you think Derek Forrest has life on this roster as a true safety 3, maybe even safety 2, if they feel like that veteran experience he has gets him to a spot where he's going to end up playing real snaps? And then is DeMar Hamlin an expendable spot? Is Cam Lewis an expendable spot to shoe in the versatile Jordan Hancock who can line up in a bunch of places? Do you almost feel like that maybe they go with like one less body to add to the corner room? Like, what do you think about safety? And this will be the final defensive group we cover.
Safety is an interesting one in the sense of, I do believe that Jordan Hancock, Cam Lewis dynamic is the one to watch there. Cam Lewis, as great of a servant as he's been for a long time for this team, he's starting to get to that back end now. I believe he's going to be 29 once the season starts. He'll be approaching it if he's not. I believe he's 28 at the moment. He's been okay and been great. And again, I love to call him a game day servant because he is that dude that is game day active because he can get you out in a pinch. If injuries strike or whatever the situation is at nickel, at safety, whatever, he can play that versatile role. That's what Jordan Hancock can be, though. So as long as Jordan Hancock has, a brain on him that is able to understand what is going on defensively in this room, from there, I would just lean to the youth and the possible athleticism and dynamic that he could bring additional to what Cam Lewis gives you. That would be your fourth safety. Now I say fourth safety because of course the other 3 are Rapp, Hamlin, and Cole Bishop. I really want to see Cole Bishop get propelled into that starting role, where he gets in over either Hamlin or Rapp. I'm curious to see where that goes. Honestly, I'm not sure which role he would go in. I personally would prefer him over Hamlin, but again, that's just me talking from an outsider. Time will tell on what their role for him will be. But I would love to see him make that jump this year. And we've seen a lot of day 2 picks in the past, although primary linebackers where they were rough their rookie year, they're not getting a lot of starting reps, and all of a sudden one offseason They figure it all out. Babbage and McDermott do their work, and boom, they are a great starting caliber player for this defense moving forward. I'm really hoping for that jump for Cole Bishop this year, that it can kind of elevate that safety group from what we had last season.
And I think Bishop, when you're talking about the concerns over who plays the deeper safety role or who plays the one high or who do you trust as like a field general, I think they want Bishop to be that. And I think they trust Bishop's athleticism to develop into that with their development, of course, their approach to it. I just wonder if that's going to translate in year two. It's a very difficult position to learn in the Bills defense. So how do you actually get him up to speed and acclimated? He has another year. He showed some flashes last year. I really like Cole Bishop and I like his profile. So I'm hoping he could take that because it also makes me feel better about Taylor Rapp. And Taylor Rapp playing a bit more of a strong safety role. They rotate everybody, right? Like they're going to move him around the field, but Taylor Rapp playing closer to the line or in the box or closer up a little more often feels better in a world I'd like to live in, just for how hard of a hitter he is, how aggressive he is, like the tenacious way he plays feels better suited for that. But he made plays in the deep halves last year too. So, I mean, I'm not totally opposed. I think Derek Forrest really is the outlier and the one, like when I'm questioning the room itself, like I think Hancock makes it. I think the versatility is basically a 1-for-1 Cam Lewis replacement. I think they'll move on and put Hancock in that spot. But Forrest to me is, what is the ceiling? Like he's on a 1-year deal, but with starting experience and good tape from Washington, is this the player you feel that you could bring in? And ultimately you have a player that kind of shores up as like that true immediate backup safety, or maybe even a starter. And do you trust him? Like that's what I'm going to be watching for in camp, because I think getting that in free agency for such reasonable value will make you feel a lot more comfortable with the safety room. And in turn, it's just a room that, again, a lot of people, myself included, wanted them to address in the draft. They kind of did it. But I think like when you talk about like going for someone like a Kevin Winston or an Xavier Watts or a Malachi Starks, like that's kind of what everyone envisioned and they didn't do it. And it's clear that right now they're showing confidence in the room by keeping it as is, unless they go and sign like Justin Simmons after the show, which that would be totally on brand for something to happen right after I go live, because that seems to happen every single damn time. Like literally like a few weeks ago or like free agency, Joey Bosa signed on Ant's show right after this. And I went live saying, I like Hoy. I like at the time, I think it was Palmer and Hoy only. I'm like, I'm curious to see what else they do for the line. Then immediately after, so I was like, of course. So I do think that he is an X factor for the safety room, especially because like people have said in the chat and people have worried, Taylor Rapp does tend to get banged up. Safety's a physical position. Is he good enough to kind of take a spot over? And could that be as early as training camp? Could that be in the first few weeks? Like, I want to see that. And I think that the safety room, I didn't think it was as bad as people made it out to be last year. I didn't think it was great. I would like the athleticism of the room to kind of grow. And I think you get that with Forrest. I think Hamlin sometimes, like in coverage, just didn't look like he could keep up with some of the more, high end talent, the faster guys, the quick cutter guys. And I think Forrest has that ability to. And I think if you can get him to stay healthy and, really transition to this defense, that could be an actual really great value signing for the Bills that provides impact. So I'm cool with it. I'm excited to see how it shakes out. But ultimately, the defense is, in my opinion, just on paper, positions have been improved. And I'm excited to see what the competition looks like. And that's kind of where I'm going to leave it. Luca, any final thoughts on this defense before we sign off tonight?
No, to the safety point and everything, last year, I don't believe it was as bad either. It's just the natural thing. You went from 2 All-Pros being back there for so long and giving you such consistently high play. There's a fall off of that. That is what you saw. It wasn't play to the field. It was just play to what you were used to in the standard. You were, maybe not even appreciating the level of how high end those safeties were. The defense, it's going to be all eyes on it when it comes to the offseason. That is for sure. And Brandon Beane made sure of it through his draft that, hey, all the discussion needs to be about the defense. Let the offense just continue to be their thing and they will be A-okay.
Yeah, I think the philosophy didn't need to change on offense. I think they just needed a few pieces, and that's exactly what they did, and I feel comfortable with that. And then defensively, they needed a rework. They got out of a lot of bodies that were here for a long time, and there's a lot of transition like last year, and this is part of it. They get a lot of new features in the room, a lot of different types of skill sets. Athleticism seems to be off the charts with who they've taken, and it's going to lead to a lot of interesting questions. And really, goal of this episode, again, just to ask those as we go into the weeds of the summer, and when we get to training camp, some of the questions we had. What does that how do they get answered? You know, like what can we sit here and say I'm going to be keeping my eyes on closely? And really these D-line battles, the secondary battles towards the back end, which I love every year, but especially this year when it seems like you have an abundance of justifiable roster options, that's what I'm going to be watching for. And I think that as far as anything else, when it comes to questions, like we didn't even talk about special teams, but it's really punter palooza with Jake Camarda and Brad Robbins. So we'll see, man. But otherwise, I got nothing else. Luca, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you as always. Guys, again, Bill's Chat, these guys do great work. They've been very good friends of the show, very approachable, awesome people. Great follow on Twitter, both of them. Tell them what you got going on, man. I mean, tell them about the show. Tell them what's going on in your world that they can check out.
Yeah, no, I mean, we Josh, my co-host here, who's not here, he runs our Twitter account. You can find us at Bill's Chat Pod. I will say we are doing a giveaway right now. We're so close to 500 subs on just our own independent YouTube. We've been trying to grow. We're only 50 away. Once we hit 500, we will be giving away a signed, I don't have it near me. Signed mini Keon Coleman helmet that I was able to acquire. We're giving that away to one person once we hit 500. All you got to do, you can find out what you can do at our Twitter, but realistically, just subscribe to our YouTube, leave a comment on our tweet where we're doing the giveaway. Find us at Twitter at Bill's Chat Pod. You can enter there. Like I said, we're only 50 away from that, so it hopefully that comes soon. We just appreciate everyone that's been watching us through, and honestly, any revenue, any money we get in, we always like to just give back because we do it for fun. We call it good therapy. That's what it honestly is. Yeah. It's fandom therapy, and we enjoy it. And we enjoy it. Yeah, Joe, you've been great to us and everything like that. So anytime you reach out to us, we always like to try to come on and just kind of give our 2 cents on everything, as we have a good conversation every time.
Absolutely. Your 2 cents are worth 1,000, maybe even more. And I appreciate you immensely, man. It's always fun talking to you. Again, check out the show, guys. It's very worth your time if you're a Bills fan, and follow Bills Chat on Twitter because they're always firing off a lot of takes. I align with most of them. I don't want that to sound like controversial or anything. You guys are cranking it out. You guys are active, and I appreciate that. So thank you again for all of you that tuned in tonight. I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Thank you for the super chat, just a tip of canoe. If you are new here, feel free to drop a like, share Cover One, this show, the other shows in our network, Bills Chat with all your Bills fan friends, and let them know what's going on in the content creation community. The draft might be over, but the train never stops. We got plenty more coming. As I mentioned last week, I have AFC preview episodes coming up that I'm super excited about. I got mine started next week for the AFC South, so stay tuned for that. Otherwise, keep your eyes out. Don't fall into the sauce too much with the wide receiver talk. Don't give up on Dwayne Carter. Eat a strawberry Uncrustable, and keep these questions in your mind for training camp, guys. There's a lot of interesting battles you can look forward to watching, and I think this is a time where it's truly going to be best of the best, refined back end of the defense with a lot of youth infusion that I'm so pumped for because it's needed to happen, and I think we could be on the cusp of something really great on defense, or not. We'll see. But that's to be answered in training camp. The questions are posed tonight, and for tonight's episode, you say, take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your evening. Enjoy your Tuesday. Stick around because at 9 p.m. you can find Anthony Prohaska live with disguised coverage to talk more about the defense if you're interested. I know we had a few people in the chat talking about safeties, talking about everything. Stay tuned. Don't close your YouTube out. Get a snack, come back, and check it out. But for us, we are done. Until next week, as always, go Bills. See you soon, everybody.